Let's call to order the meeting of the Board of Directors of the California Housing Financing Agency. Welcome, everyone. How about a roll call?
Ms. Avila Farias?
Here.
Mr. Schaefer for Treasurer Chung?
Here.
Ms. Gallagher?
Here.
Ms. Gunn for Dr. Imbassiani? Mr. Hunter?
Here.
Ms. Johnson Hall? Ms. Amon for Mr. Metcalf? Mr. Prince?
Here. Loudly.
Ms. Von Cloak-Lieber for Secretary Podesta?
Here.
Ms. Sotelo?
Here.
Mr. Russell? Mr. Gunning?
Here.
Mr. Alex? Ms. Onodera for Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Ms. Patterson?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Awesome. Thank you. The minutes have been distributed with your packet. Is there any objection to moving approval as distributed? Okay. Minutes have been accepted. I don't know if I have any comments, Tia. Do you have anything you want to say?
I did want to report on the National Council State Housing
Oh, yeah,
Agency
perfect. Go ahead.
Conference. So, board members, myself and Ben and Mr. Prince attended, oh, do I need to, sorry. Can you hear me? All right. So the National Council State Housing Agency's Ledge Conference was March 3rd through 7th. We did take a delegation of CalHFA. Ben Metcalf attended, Preston Prince, myself, and a few of the CalHFA staff. It was successful. This is our second kind of coming together and having a delegation go to Washington, D.C., in which we have a luncheon with congressional staff. We heard from our governor's office staff that it was very successful. We thought we had more people that turned out for the luncheon last year than we did this year, but she said, but we had the right people this year. So we did have a series of meetings. There was a new executive director for NCSHA, is Stockton Williams. There was a national search and he was selected during that conference. I did have the ability to sit on that national selection committee. And so it was a very thorough, diligent process in getting him appointed to serve in that position. So we're happy to have Stockton Williams in that new position. As you all were noticed, or the director of multifamily told you all about the issues we're having with the continuation of the Federal Finance Bank HUD risk share. We're continuing to work through our portfolio and pipeline on that and continuing to advocate for a softer extension of that program and seeking, and you'll hear more about that in my on an item that I'm going to be discussing with you later on in the agenda. We've also posted a recruitment for our general counsel and our director of legislation, and so that has been posted, and so we are recruiting for those two positions, and we hope to have them filled by the end of the fiscal year. And so that concludes my report.
Awesome. Thank you. Next item is...
I'm sorry. So I would love to just add a few comments. So I thought it was a wonderful legislative conference. I've been going back to DC now for 30 years, having conversations with elected officials, and but I think NCSHA has a very thoughtful, defined set of legislative priorities, and so I just kind of want to acknowledge that and the work that they've done to protect the private activity bonds and 4% credits, the work that they are doing to advocate for the expansion of the 9% program and some of the regulatory kind of reform that needs to happen within the program to make it a little bit more better, since it's already better. It's already doing really well. So I thought that was really great. I do think, though I have no connection to them, that it seems to me that both CIDLAC and TCAP would really benefit from being part of that as well. And since so many of the policies that were talked about at NCSHA is connected to the tax credit program, so I just kind of throw it out there. I do think that, so it's my second NCSHA conference, I think, and we're California, so we're special, right? we get it that housing and housing finance is part of something broader and bigger. It's about economic opportunity for families. It's about neighborhood revitalization. NCSHA, to me, really focused on the transaction. And so the times that I had, like with the board, where I got to ask a couple of questions, was really I think that they need to be pushed into a little bit more holistic approach about the role that NCSHA plays. I'm hoping that that's what happens with the new director. I get it that you have 50 members, so that means you have a lot of members who are coming from conservative states, and so maybe they don't necessarily share the same ideas that California has about how housing plays a role in education and health and so on. So I just think that as much as we can help push NCSHA to be a little bit more holistic in their ideas, I think it would be great. And then the last thing is that I know we tried having some meetings with the delegation from the Valley, and we weren't able to do that, though we were able to get into the offices and meet with staff, but not with the members. But I am meeting with Congressman Nunes next week in person, and I'm definitely going to advocate for the issues that I learned about that really are important to CalHFA, particularly around the risk sharing program. So I just wanted to bring that up, that it's given me that much more information to share as I meet with folks. I'm hoping to also be able to sit, so Congressman Nunes is on the Appropriations Committee, I seem to remember, and Congressman Valadeo is on the THUD bill, or the THUD committee. So I'm going to hopefully also have some FaceTime with them to be able to share the issues that are very important to CalHFA and to Fresno. So I just wanted to bring those items up. Well, I thought it was great.
Thank you for those
Can I add?
comments, Preston. I echo those. I think that's one of the things that when we talk about the next item, the Executive Evaluation Committee, we're special in California. I agree with you, and we have a role and a leadership role, and that's one of the things we expect from TIA as well. So go ahead, dear.
I did want to say, as part of that holistic approach, I failed to mention this in my report, but the Western HFAs are meeting here in California. We're hosting. So after the board meeting, if any of the board members want to join the Washington Housing Finance Agency and the Oregon Housing Finance Agency back over at 500 Capitol Mall, they've gotten together for an exchange. It's an exchange of ideas, because we know that some of the issues that we're facing here in California, Oregon and Washington as high-cost states are also facing some of those issues, whether it's homelessness or providing housing for the missing middle. And so that exchange is going to be going on. And Mr. Prince had mentioned in our last board meeting that there are housing authority directors on some of the HFA boards. And so being able to exchange and bring that synergy between local housing authorities and state HFAs, I think that's something we want to continue to do. And we're starting to have those conversations in our HFA exchanges. So I wanted to just close the loop on that.
And Kim Herman, who's the director of Washington State Housing Finance Commission, is one of my first mentors. And so I'm really glad that you are showing him the great work happening in California. There was another, I did get into a little bit of trouble, so I do have to disclose that Secretary Carson made a comment that that the tax reform has not impacted the low-income housing production. And because of the ingenuity of private sector developers, that even with the reduction of the corporate tax rate, that's not going to impact housing production, which is just not true. So I didn't ask him, I did not embarrass him, but I might have the next day asked a Republican member from Minnesota about how to deal with this world of alternative facts. And so I did not mean to embarrass CalHFA, but I do think it's a legitimate conversation of like, I couldn't help it. But yeah, I found it to be really difficult when there are just truths that are being ignored. So we can go ahead and have a conversation and say, yes, the corporate tax reduction is going to lower housing production, and just admit that that's the case, but then there's ways to either mitigate that or do other methods to increase affordable housing production, because we need those tools here in California. But I just think that there were some things that didn't quite make sense to me. And this is part where I think NCSHA needs to go out on a limb a little bit more and say, these programs, that there are things that are true that we have to like express, even if it's not going to be liked.
Correct. Thanks, Preston. Moving on to item number 4. Is any other comments? Ben, you okay? Item number 4, the Executive Evaluation Committee met prior to this meeting, and we've begun the long and arduous process of evaluating the Executive Director. We heard from Tia this morning. We plan to meet again and will report out to the board at the next meeting in April with our evaluation and recommendation, and certainly look for your input and comments on that. So just wanted to share that with you, let you know it's coming at the next meeting. All right, item number 5, update on asset management organizational assessment. Who's doing that? Mr. Carroll? You get the hot seat in front.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to introduce Ben Frank, consultant we've engaged as part of our overall asset
Microphone's not,
Turn your mic on, Mike.
it's the little box in front of you.
Is there a thing to?
There we go.
There you go.
That better?
That's better.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to introduce Ben Frank. He's a consultant, management consultant that we've engaged as part of our overall effort to look at the asset management function of the agency. You will recall that the last audit done for CalHFA noted some deficiencies in the asset management group. Principally, the 3 areas noted were, one, that the federal programs, and particularly the HUD Section 8 program, there were some missed inspections and in terms of deadlines. They also recommended that we prepare written policies and procedures for the programs. And thirdly, that we conduct an overall organizational assessment of that function of the agency. So following that audit, we embarked on a plan to address all of those concerns, and including bringing on Mr. Frank, who's worked with us in the past on other assessments of different parts of the agency. Mr. Frank focused primarily on the federal programs and how we manage those, and then, of course, the overall organizational assessment. While he was doing that, staff have been working on policies and procedures, and so the 2 efforts have dovetailed, and we are, as a result of Mr. Frank's work and the policies and procedures manual that we are finalizing, which will be ready March 31st, we are doing an organizational realignment of the group, and it's the purpose of the alignment is to create program responsibility at the manager level. At the highest level, we're splitting the federal programs and the state programs so that one half of the organization will focus on the federal programs and the other half on the state programs. And then each line manager or officer will have primary responsibility for 1 or 2 programs. In the past, there was a desire to cross-train staff, and so staff at the line level were each managing multiple types of programs in their portfolio. So we're simplifying that so that each officer group or each management group has 1 or 2 programs that they focus on and they're entirely responsible for. We think that this makes a lot of sense, and we've been working closely with Mr. Frank as he's done his investigations with staff and consultations with staff. And so the basic framework of the plan was rolled out to staff in December. So we've been planning for this transition. So effective April 1st, the official move of staff functions will happen. We think that we appreciate the work of Mr. Frank. I know he spent a lot of time with staff. I spent time in working sessions with staff as we really drilled down into how things are done and who's responsible for what. And I think we have a really good plan here. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank for his work. And I think you have the summary report in your package. I don't want to go over that in great detail, but it's, I would recommend reading it. It's got good background on current, whether the function previously occurred and how we're planning to roll out the new changes. So I'd ask Mr. Frank to add any comments of his own on his work, and then he's certainly available to answer questions on the plan.
Thank you. Very briefly, some of you may recall, and as was mentioned, I did do, I'm not completely new on the block here. I did a major study and review of the entire CalHFA organization about 2.5 years ago. And at that time, the focus was much more on the lending side of the business, both single family and multifamily, and there was only a limited review done of the asset management branch at that time. So the focus here was to do a more in-depth review specifically of the changes that had occurred in the asset management branch's workload and staffing in the past few years, and changes determine whether there might be opportunities to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the branch currently. And so I interviewed I had individual interviews with all 26 staff in that branch, and including 11 asset managers. And as was mentioned, with respect to the asset management activity, the responsibilities for all of the projects were dispersed across all the different asset managers. So for example, every asset manager, if they're carrying a caseload of say 50 to 60 projects, they would have maybe 10 or 15 or 20 Mental Health Services Act projects. They would have another dozen or 15 or 20 80-20 type projects that they would be responsible for. And then they would also have maybe a dozen or so Section 8 projects that they would be responsible for, along with other responsibilities. And so these responsibilities were dispersed not only across all the different staff, but also because of the way CalHFA is organized geographically, with staff in both Culver City and in Sacramento. And after reviewing that and talking to the staff, all of the staff agreed that this limited their, it's difficult to hold staff accountable and responsible for performance when all of the responsibility is dispersed across all the different staff in two different geographic locations. And so it made sense to look at that arrangement and see if there were ways to maybe consolidate some responsibilities to provide better oversight and accountability and leadership and management for each of the specific program areas. And basically all of the staff agreed that I talked with, for example, of the 11 asset managers, 10 of them agreed that the current way that the work was allocated across all the different staff was not the best way. Didn't appear to be the best way to do it. And so we basically looked at different options that might be possible and came to the conclusion that the best path forward would be to consolidate, as Michael mentioned, the responsibility for the federal programs, the Section 8 and Section 811 programs in the Culver City office, because 2/3 of the projects are actually located down in Southern California to begin with. And then to conversely consolidate responsibility, say, for the 80-20 projects and the MHSA projects in the Sacramento office. And those realignments basically are consistent with the allocation of staff. Because you have like 2/3 of the staff are in Sacramento, and that way 2/3 of the projects would be in Sacramento or assigned to people that are based in Sacramento, and 1/3 of the projects, most of which are based in Southern California anyways, would be allocated to staff that are in the Culver City office. So that was one major area finding, and as Michael mentioned, the staff previously has had experience with reallocating projects, reassigning projects among the different staff, so it's easy. Everybody was doing everything, And so you're just trading off projects and saying, hey, we'll move some of the 80-20 projects up here, and we'll move some of the MHSA projects up here from the staff that are based in Culver City. And conversely, the Section 8 projects that were assigned to staff in Sacramento would just be transferred to staff in Culver City. The other major area that we focused on, because it was identified by the auditors, was the scheduling of the MORs. And again, what we found with the MORs, which is the leasing and occupancy reviews of the Section 8 properties primarily, was that, again, that responsibility was very fragmented and dispersed across multiple staff and multiple business units in both Sacramento and in Culver City. And we said it makes sense, again, to consolidate all of that responsibility as much as we reasonably can in Southern California, in the Culver City office, and to set up, there was because of the auditor's findings, there was some variability and confusion about the scheduling policy, and we developed a proposal for a new policy regarding the scheduling of MORs so that they will all be completed within a year or so of the prior year's review. And that new policy was previewed by the auditors, and they concurred that that basically addressed their concerns. And so we're in the process of also implementing that new policy, not only for the remainder of the current 2017-18 fiscal year, but also looking forward to the 2018-19 fiscal year. And that's kind of, those are the two major areas of changes, and then there's some other secondary levels of changes that are occurring that are realigning the staff and the workloads consistent with those proposals. So, any questions?
Thank you so much for that information. Just two quick questions. Do we have a review process or oversight process in place to monitor these changes, both in terms of the organizational structure and the process improvements? And secondly, with the organizational change, is there any new risk that you see introduced into this new model?
We do have a schedule for the transition to the new staffing model. And I will be, periodically, monthly reviewing the changes and making sure that we're on track, particularly with this respect to the scheduling of the inspections. Of course, that was the audit finding. I don't, Ben, you might have a different opinion about this, but I don't see any additional risk being introduced. I think we're reducing risk with this approach. That's how I view it anyway.
And I could offer two things on that. One, it's currently planned that I'm going to come back through and do a follow-up review in June to see how the implementation is progressing and identify any implementation-related problems so that those can be kind of timely addressed. So that's like a 60-day review period, and we'll address needs at that point then. Secondly, yes, on the risk, the reason for the consolidation is that it basically actually reduces risk. By consolidating the responsibility, let's say for the Section 8 program in the Culver City office and having most of the staff based there, you have a pool of resources available to address the workload and service demands for that program and to implement changes that occur related to that program. Currently, and so that gives you reduces your risk because you have a bigger pool of resources concentrated just to deal with that program. Conversely, under the current arrangement, where those responsibilities are dispersed across staff and you have a person here and one person there and one person in another place doing those responsibilities with no chain of command over those resources, you actually increase the risk, because if something happens to that person or there's a performance problem with one particular person, you don't have the backup for that person. You don't have the flexibility, and you don't have a chain of command that can keep track of all of those resources and workloads and workflows and performance issues. So we're actually reducing risk by consolidating and pooling resources to deal with specific areas of responsibility.
Mr. Russell.
I have questions in two areas. So one is with regards to this change in allocation of responsibilities. Have you looked at what the change in travel behaviors and operational costs would be, first in implementing it and then subsequently in the ongoing operations?
Well, we do expect there to be less travel, given the geographic distribution and the concentration in Southern California. We haven't quantified that, but we will be tracking it.
And the second question then is really about the personnel, morale, engagement. Can you talk about the process going into this planning and then moving forward, how you're engaging the personnel and what kinds of reactions, what kinds of morale issues we may have?
Well, it was a very interactive process. Staff had a lot of input into this, and Mr. Frank was very transparent throughout. It wasn't like he did his work in a black box. And, when we got to the level of the details on the workload for each staff, we went through several sessions where we identified how long it took for each particular task, and there was a lot of back and forth. And as Ben mentioned, the idea of the overall concept of consolidating and having fewer program area responsibilities per staff was widely recognized among the staff as a good thing. So I think the morale is okay. It's kind of something we have to watch as we go forward. Now, there may be instances where, as people report to different managers, there may be issues around that we'll have to pay attention to. But I think overall, staff are receptive to this.
Yes.
So I do want to compliment you on actually talking to staff and asking them what the best way to approach some of the modifications and changes were. So I thought that was very good in your report, and I'm glad that you actually did that. And the recommendations that you make on the MORES review and adjustments are excellent. I think that's something that the board really needs to be watching, certainly in the next 6 to 12 months. So I look forward to your report back in June on that. But I think the recommendations that you made there were very strong. For me, I think my two areas of just concern or just questioning is asset management department or branch, as we call it. I want to make sure that to the extent that it is so operationally heavy, right? Because we have so many staff members as part of the branch, and they're all necessary and it's all important. And I know your recommendation is to add 2 or 3 positions, but I just kind of want to understand more globally, does the department, and maybe this is more of a budget conversation when the budget comes up, but are we capturing the fees that we need to capture when we're monitoring third-party contracts? Are we capturing the fees for our own portfolio? We have about 600 assets that we actually review, and of those 600, how many are generating income that can go to support the functions of the department? Now, I know we're not at break even, or it's not a profit center for us, and it's more of an obligation that we've taken on. But one of the areas of concern was under the MHSA contract. We're spending a lot of time and energy on the MHSA contract. It's a great contract, it's a good contract, but we're not making up any fees for that. So one of the things that I was looking forward to getting in your asset management evaluation was really kind of more of an economic analysis of the costs associated with the functions and how we could make those more efficient and monetize some of the recommendations that you're making. So it's not really a question, it's more, it's something we should look at.
I am glad you brought that up, because we are, as we were talking about business planning for next fiscal year, continuing to look at efficiencies in asset management is definitely in the plan. And whether it's in terms of working with our partner state and local agencies in terms of sharing, monitoring, and looking for opportunities to increase those efficiencies. And then on the revenue side, with the FFB capital source going away, we've changed our pricing structure. And whereas we used to have monitoring kind of built into the spread of the interest rate. Going forward, we're charging a separate annual fee for monitoring that should enhance, increase the revenue and, more contribute to the operation side.
And I just want us to be mindful of that because there are layers upon layers of monitoring that, nonprofits and for-profits have to engage with, HCD, TCAC, CIDLAC. Everybody's doing monitoring and then the localities are doing monitoring. And that's a lot of monitoring fees. And so to the extent that as an industry, we need to be more collaborative in terms of what we're doing, I don't necessarily want us to necessarily look at the increasing of monitoring fees in isolation. So, we just have to look at it in terms of a context.
Good point. We do meet regularly with HCD and TCAC and share inspection schedules and monitoring schedules. And each year, I think we come up with more ways to reduce the burden on the projects in terms of how many visits they get from different agencies. I think the next step is to talk to local governments. And, that's going to be a lot more work because there's so many of them. But it's something that TIA is really pushing on, that we look for those efficiencies. And for example, for MSHA, the frequency of inspections, and are there local county housing departments that could assist with the monitoring. And so it's a constant refrain internally for us.
I could just toss in here that from the analysis that we did, one of the problems was you couldn't really isolate the workload, and because you couldn't isolate the workload, you couldn't isolate the costs for service for each of the different programs because everything was so dispersed across all the different staff in both of the locations throughout the branch. And so, for example, if you look at the Exhibit 2 on the in the report, where it's got the new organizational structure, you can clearly see this is the staffing to do the Section 8 primarily. There's some 811 projects also there, but it's dominated, it's 95%. That's your direct labor costs associated with the Section 8 monitoring activity, which has its own reimbursement administrative fee that is collected for those activities. And of course, there's overhead, indirect and overhead costs that are allocated on top of that. But conversely, we did for the remaining staff that are, and workloads that are in Sacramento, which are the 80/20 projects and the MHSA projects and some other smaller projects, we went through with staff, we had a series of meetings with them, and we actually constructed a fairly detailed workload model for their work. And it decomposes how much time they spend on MHSA projects, for example, and 80/20 projects, to do reviews of the audits, to do reviews of the budgets, to do changes in a transfer of ownership activities, and report to CIDLAC and so on. It's broken down into that level, so you can much more clearly and easily identify what are the labor resource requirements and costs associated with performing the asset management services for each program. And I don't think that type of information's been available before. So that is available now, and it can be used, if you will, for, as you're suggesting, it's available, it's on the shelf to be used for fiscal analysis and budgeting purposes on a going forward basis. And you wouldn't have been able to do that previously, so.
Great work. I just wanted to piggyback on that and say there's definitely good. I think this reorganization realignment should be facilitative of finding those operational efficiencies in terms of coordination with HCD asset management. I also do think there's some good, you can get some good, squeeze out of the lemon here by focusing on the local government side, by just looking at the larger local governments where I think much of your portfolio, LA and San Francisco, a few others. I also wanted to note, I think that directionally you guys are very much taking this in in the specialization area in a way that I think we're seeing a lot of other public agencies, larger asset management companies, HUD, Fannie Mae, others have sort of embraced this more specialized focus and seen good results from it. So I think your work can be seen in that context. I had sort of two questions, I guess, for you. One is, have you modeled into this the sort of growth expectations that we're looking at on the asset management side. We're looking at growing, I mean, obviously, there's stuff coming out of the risk-sharing work, there's stuff potentially coming out of the middle income work that's gonna get funded. I assume that flows into the state side, and you've kind of accommodated that growth and put some placeholders in there for that, but just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And then second of all, I think, everything in here makes a lot of sense to me, but I was curious if you to what extent, as we're talking about random samples on tenant files, or we're looking at annual inspections through the moors, are we also using risk-based factors in terms of either where we direct those random samples, which projects we focus more of our time and interest on, and/or if we do have a property that is humming along, there's no risk indicators, good cash flow, good debt service coverage ratio, so on and so forth, good physical inspections. Can we just do a file review and we don't need to visit in a given year? Do we have that flexibility with our agreements with HUD? Again, it's a risk-based question in terms of directing the resources to the places where the need is going to be greatest and the risks are going to be highest.
Well, on your first question, we did look at sort of the pipeline of stuff that is currently in the lending shop and will be moving to asset management, and there is room for that growth for the foreseeable future, but part of the hiring that we're looking at anticipates that. And in terms of risk and the frequency and the way we do sampling, to some extent, specifically on the HUD side, they have specific requirements around sampling size relative to the size of the project, and they don't have a lot of risk allowances for frequency or, however, on the other side of the house, on the primarily the state programs, we do a lot more latitude, and that's part of our plan for next year, is to start looking at, from a risk perspective, what do you really need to look for in an audit? And if a project is performing, can you, stratify the risk so that you focus on the potential problem areas and, reduce the frequency on the well-performing projects. So yes, it's very much a work in progress, but we're certainly looking at it.
Maybe a little bit outside the scope of what you looked at. And it's something that, as a board, we've talked about before, about CalHFA needing to upgrade some of the technology that supports the work. I know in the single-family lending side, it's come up. I'm wondering, in this area, does technology play a significant role? Is that something you looked at? Are our systems adequate now, or kind of did that?
Well, we definitely need technology improvements in terms of, we have 3 systems that manage the loans from, the origination side through asset management and the accounting function. And it is on the plan to look at, ideally, a single system that would unify all of that across the divisions in the accounting function. We have a couple of, we have a number of vendors who've approached us with ideas, and we've looked at a few, and it's definitely in the work plan to see if we can nail that down in the coming year to focus on that project.
Questions from the board? Awesome. Michael, Ben, thank you. And thanks for your work. You're an asset around here. We certainly value your contributions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do, right?
Yes, we do.
All right. I think we have the Tim and Larry show coming up here. Or is it Larry? Single family resolutions?
Make sure you introduce him, 'cause I
Yes.
forgot to do that.
Well, you're going to do it.
Oh, okay.
You guys beat me to it over there. Before Larry sits down, why don't you do the introductions? I know we know him, but.
Right, so as part of our recruitment and filling our senior level staffing, we did a little shuffle where our unicorn, Mr. Sue, who had 2 jobs, Director of Homeownership and Director of Finance, was appointed to be the Director of Homeownership, and were able to convince Mr. Flood to move from Washington, D.C., where he was with the United States Treasury, to be our Director of Finance. So we are very, very pleased with these moves. And so I do want to introduce you to Larry Flood. And if Larry, you wanted to give a little bit about your background to the board before we get started, that might be wonderful.
No. Is this on, hopefully?
Yep, the green light's on.
Yes, I can see that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board for, inviting me here and being very gracious about it. As Tia said, my name is Larry Flood. I have been here this is my third week on the job, and this is my first time appearing before you. By way of background, I came here, as Tia mentioned, from the United States Treasury, where I was a senior policy advisor for public finance. Prior to that, I had spent about 4 years as a advisor and subject matter expert with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac on the HFA initiative and other matters. And before that, I spent a nice long career either as an investment banker or a financial advisor, always in the affordable housing space. I am happy, and I'd like to thank Tia for providing the opportunity for me to sit before you today. And I'd like to thank Tim for his generosity in terms of time and in sharing his invaluable knowledge of the inner workings of the agency as I settle into my new responsibilities. I think if you look at agenda items 6 through 10.
Before you do that, I just want to say that, going back to item 4, that this is the reason why we are so proud of what you're doing for us, Tia, is to bring in such talent as Mr. Flood to come join us. So I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for joining us. I think we should pause and welcome you warmly to our organization. So thank you.
Do that. Now you can do work. Now I can do work. Okay. Agenda items 6 through 12 sort of comprise the annual resolutions that we will bring at each March board meeting. If you look at them collectively, they actually authorize staff to conduct the single-family and multifamily lending activities of the agency at your behalf. Since they are annual resolutions, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about each one individually because they're really not substantially different than what they were last year. There are a couple of areas that we've made some modifications, but we'll get to that as we move along. The first resolution is Resolution 18-08. That is the single-family bond resolution. It authorizes the staff to issue single-family bonds for new money purchases, for refunding bonds. It also authorizes staff to modify existing agreements, swap agreements, liquidity agreements, and the like. As is the case from last year, we are not allowing any whole loans to be part of the collateral, and we're only issuing fixed-rate bonds. We're not allowing swaps of any kind. As is with last year, we are also only issuing up to $100 million of taxable bonds. Do this. The other section of this resolution deals with credit facilities. We have an existing policy not to exceed $500 million in credit facilities. This is a joint single-family and multifamily aggregation. Currently, we have a $200 million facility with the Federal Home Loan Bank, and that is clearly well under $500 million. We're still talking to the Federal Home Loan Bank about the possibility of accepting multifamily collateral as part of that line, and those discussions are ongoing. That's really all I had to say about this resolution. Are there any questions? Anybody like to make a motion?
1808.
Motion to approve Resolution 1808.
I'll second it. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call?
Ms. Avila Farias,
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer,
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher, Ms. Gunn,
Yes.
Mr. Hunter,
Yes.
Mr. Metcalf, Mr. Prince,
Yes.
Ms. Von Kalkweber,
Yes.
Ms. Sotelo,
Yes.
Mr. Russell, Mr. Gunning.
Aye.
Resolution 1808 is approved.
I'm laughing because the multifamily staff are like going, why do we get so beat up and you're just flying right through, but that just made me laugh. I had to bring that up.
Okay. Agenda item 7 is Resolution 18-009, which is the single-family non-bond resolution. As you're aware, last year we did no single-family bonds to speak of, and that the single-family production was originated through the sale of loans into MBS securities. This resolution allows the agency to continue with that structure. As rates change, we will be constantly evaluating the efficiency of this execution against doing a bond finance deal, and we'll, pick whichever execution at that time will yield the best results. This resolution is also in 3 parts. It delegates the authority to enter into non-bond financing mechanisms to staff. It allows us to securitize loans into MBS securities with no limitation on volume. In terms of using agency unencumbered cash, we've restricted the purchase of first lien whole loans to a number of not to exceed $5 million, and lending to local partnerships, particularly for things like ADU loans and other subordinate debt, is going to be restricted to a number of not to exceed $10 million. That's really all I wanted to say about the non-bond resolution. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I know we had some conversations last year on the budget about using agency funds for different purposes. So I'm just curious as where the numbers, why 5 and why 10 million, where those numbers are coming from, and what's the policy logic, if any?
So I think that the $5 million for the whole loans, that's related to the 710 projects. So those few, we have gotten a few loans that's gone through approval. We do feel that $5 million is adequate for what's in the pipeline. And as Larry mentioned, that $10 million is our ongoing effort to be helpful in the ADU space. And there's some interesting things that are being done by CDFIs that we are talking to. A couple of them that we talked to recently are gearing up in terms of staffing up and taking this effort seriously. I would add a couple of things. First of all, Michael, it's very, very good to see you. We missed you at the last couple of board meetings. And 2 is that it's Larry's show. It's not. I'm not part of the show anymore. And thirdly, that just a little bit color on this. What the intent of this non-bond resolution is that there are various pieces of this resolution. So for example, doing the lending through the TDA model, and doing the 710 project, and doing the ADUs. Typically what we have done in the past is that we come to the board individually for those kind of activities and get it approved. But at some point, we realized that so much of our activity was away from the bonds, and it was on these individual authorizations from the board, that we needed to come back to remind the board about each and every one of these along the way. It's meant to be like a sort of like a collection of the things that are still ongoing. the conversation is about 710 is ongoing, and we have a few loans that are finally coming through. ADU is a conversation that we're hoping that this next 12 months we can get going on that front as well. So this is meant to be sort of a catch-all for all the things that's not related to bonds, that we felt that along the way we get approval from the board explicitly, but it's a good way to remind that, we do have resources that are tied up in some of these previous approvals.
Can I ask, you mentioned the ADUs. Is that a conversation we're having coming up, or is there other programs and efforts underway at the present time that we are engaged in with the ADUs?
So what we did recently was that a few months ago, we did a survey through the League of Cities, trying to get a handle on what the locals and the cities are thinking about in terms of ADUs. The survey, in large part, came back suggesting that they want to spend more money on education. And we didn't find that to be a focus that we necessarily wanted to be helpful in the sense that if we were going to provide subsidized dollars to, let's say, spur, let's say, the development ADUs, that we felt that dollars in education from CalHFA's point of view was not our first preference. So recently, there have been some CDFIs who've gotten some dollars, I believe, from some bulge bracket banks that are going to do some ADU construction. So we're kind of looking at that model and finding that perhaps that model is more interesting than our dollars going to education. So that conversation is ongoing. We're talking to Genesis, we're talking to Self-Help, we're talking to the Housing Trust Fund in Silicon Valley, who has been in the press recently. So that's a quick update of our effort on that front.
And the reason this is intriguing, it's a number of reasons, but one of which is a realtor just last night was telling me about a loan product, 3% down, that included, if you bought a house, that you could also get an extra $100,000 to build an ADU. And this was an insured loan product, and he didn't give me details. I'm just really intrigued if that's something you've seen on the marketplace, and if that's part of the I'd like to have this conversation moving forward. I'm very intrigued by this. So no need for an answer, just comment.
Any additional questions by the board? Is there a motion to approve resolution 18-09?
Also move.
It's been moved. Is there a seconded? Roll call, Melissa.
Ms. Davila Farias?
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher? Ms. Gunn?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Metcalf?
Yes.
Mr. Prince? Ms. Von Koch-Liebert?
Yes.
Ms. Sotelo? Mr. Russell? Mr. Gunning?
Aye.
Resolution 1809 is approved.
The interim chair did an okay job last time, but I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Preston. Item number 8.
Okay. Item number 8 is Resolution 18-10. This is analogous to the single-family bond resolution. This one is for multifamily. Again, it's something that we're going to bring every March board meeting.
Yes.
Again, there are no real...
Fast forward slide.
Okay. That's a good idea. Thank you. Again, there are no real substantial changes to this resolution from what you saw last year. It does authorize, that new money bonds be restricted to fixed rate, which is pretty much the same as last year. We've put a cap on the amount of governmental purpose, 501c3, and federally taxable bonds that can be issued. We've capped that at $250 million. We have the same restriction on credit facilities, that there is a $500 million limit that includes the single-family facilities as well. And, you know, I don't believe that there were any modifications, substantial modifications to this resolution from what you saw last year. So I would like to entertain questions.
Mr. Flood, I had a question about this. How many projects or units does this represent in terms of development opportunities? Is this something that we can kind of quantify? It's a SIDLAC, or maybe I'm not understanding what the application is.
Which, we're talking about the 250?
About the 250.
Oh. No, those projects are usually relatively small. I don't know that we can actually quantify a number, but, you know, I think that, you know, pick a number. I mean, they're probably 5 million-ish when you do these, so. You know,
Relatively small.
yeah, so it's a relatively small amount of projects.
You do a few of them, okay. Okay. Okay, I was just curious because I don't remember, last year I remember there was discussion that we didn't need this much, and I'm not sure why we're asking for the same amount again. But maybe I'm thinking of something else.
These are in large part not to exceed numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So as you, for example, later on, we'll notice that for the SIDLAC dollar amount, we actually are increasing that. And you might recall that the last couple of years, there have been times towards the end of the year in which we have come to you to increase our SIDLAC authorization. I think on one occasion, we might even have called a special meeting just to do that. We increased it this year just so that we can avoid that.
Okay.
They're in large part not to exceed dollar amounts, and I think that when we take carry forward amounts from SIDLAC, I generally like to think that board members think that's a helpful thing to do. So these are in large part not to exceed numbers.
Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions from the board? Good, is there a motion to approve resolution 18-10? It's been moved and seconded. Roll call.
I'm sorry, Ms. Avila Farias? Yes. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher? Yes. Ms. Gunn?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Ms. Johnson Hall? Oh, pardon me, she's an absent. Mr. Metcalf? Yes. Mr. Prince? Yes. Ms. Von Koch-Lieber?
Yes.
Ms. Sotelo?
Yes.
Mr. Russell? Aye. Mr. Gunning?
Aye.
Resolution 18-10 is approved.
Thank you.
Awesome, moving along.
Okay. Agenda item 9 is resolution 18-11, and this is the multifamily non-bond resolution, which you know, primarily deals with lending activities using partnerships. We've used this resolution really to finance the HUD FFB multifamily risk sharing program, and in particular, that was a program that when I was at Treasury that I was extremely familiar with, and you know, it almost feels like they waited till I was out the door and like couldn't see me anymore to say, nope, we want to put some limits on this program. You know, we do know that there is a $500 million increase to the amount of that program that's already in the works. Whether or not that number can be increased is something that we're still negotiating and talking to, and I think that will be something that will come back to the board at a later date. But again, this resolution has no substantive changes from last year. The only other thing that I would add is that we are, as we did last year, putting a not to exceed $75 million cap on any first lien and subordinate loans that we would do under this resolution. With that, I'll take questions.
I move to approve Resolution 1811.
Thank you, Don. Is there a second? Anna Maria? It's been moved and seconded. Melissa?
Ms. Avila Farias?
Yes.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher? Ms. Gunn?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Metcalf? Mr. Prince?
Yes.
Ms. Von Cook-Liebert?
Yes.
Ms. Sotelo?
Yes.
Mr. Russell? Mr. Gunning?
Aye.
Resolution 18-11 is approved.
Yeah, thank you. The last agenda item, item 10 for this is the application to SIDLAC for private activity bond volume cap. Again, this is something that we do on an annual basis. This year, for the home ownership program, we are applying for up to $1 billion in private activity bond allocation. You know, I think that's the same as what we applied for last year, even though I think in 2017, we received about $250 million. That was converted to mortgage credit certificates. We believe that that we should see a volume that would make, you know, applying for $1 billion appropriate, and think that again that's appropriate. I think on the multifamily side, we are asking for up to $2 billion in private activity bonds. Now, I think last year there was some carving up of this amount that we did not include in the bond volume application deals that we did not have to bring to the board. This year, we want to make that sort of explicit and just lump everything together and go for a $2 million bond volume activity cap. Last year, I think we received $487 million, and 315 of that was carry forward allocation. But we expect to have a lot more volume this year, and so I think that that's an appropriate ask as well.
Questions of the board? Good. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 18-12? Yeah.
So most of what we're doing is, or all of what we're doing lately is on the non-bond side. Just what's the, you know, I'm confused by the allocation relative to the non-bond. I mean, do we need private activity allocation for the stuff we're doing in the TBA model, or is that outside the scope of that completely?
No, we do not.
Okay.
And that's part, in part, that's part of the strength of what we're doing. So for example, at the end of last year, you might recall when we were going through that fire drill, we just kept chugging along and didn't really impact what we were doing. So yeah, in short, a single family model right now does not require MRB volume cap.
So then when you're saying we converted certificates, like, can you explain that process of, you know, the?
Yeah, so what you can do with private activity volume cap on a single family side is that you can issue bonds, and if you issue bonds, you issue a dollar bond for every dollar volume cap you get. And if you don't want to issue bonds, you can convert them to MCC, and then when you do that, you take, if you were to get $100 million of MRB, you divide it by 4, so you get $25 million of MCC. So we do have an MCC program that is run in parallel with our single family lending program. So it's possible for someone to get a loan from us and also get an MCC from us, and we outsource the origination of the MCCs to a vendor. So it's just another sort of enhancement to the people who come to us. And that doesn't require us to issue any bonds. It just requires quite a bit of, dare I say, convoluted tracking and filing with IRS.
Yeah. I also think with tax reform that it's not clear how that's going to affect the, the MCC benefit, since it's a credit on the individual tax return of the home buyer.
On mortgage interest deductions, whether it'd be subject to that or not, or would, so you mean?
Yeah, it's also just not clear that, that there's going to be as much liability to offset.
Right. So, yes, he got it. If you don't have the liability, you can't use the credit. And so with tax reform,
Right.
is the MCC even going to be valuable or useful?
Right.
And so it's just unclear right now.
Got it. Thank you.
You have the cost, but you don't have the liability. You're still paying the taxes, but you don't have the, you can't, yeah,
Right.
you don't have that, right?
And that's one of the debates that we've been having for quite some time about MCC, is that it sounds good and it can be helpful, but at the same time, you as board members like it when you hear that we say that we served as say 80% AMI in single family. Well, that 80% AMI single family household is unlikely to benefit from an MCC. But if they were to get an MCC, what the actual outcome is in terms of how much they can write off over time, we don't know. And getting the MCC certificate does cost money up front. There's an application fee and things like that.
Thank you.
It's not on topic, Mr. Chair, but I think that would be a nice report back when we talk about the single-family product and seeing what the impact is on MCCs. You know, it's a really good tool for that missing middle, population. And as we talk about single-family development and single-family loan product, maybe you can also report on that, sometime in the next quarter.
Okay. We can try to address that as part of the business planning in May.
Okay, thank you.
Is there a resolution to adopt, a motion to adopt Resolution 18-12? So moved. Let's move, is there a second? Yep.
You mentioned that last year the $2 billion was carved up. And was that into different program categories of the kinds of lending we were doing, or what was the carve up?
So what we did last year was that the language said that if we bring a deal to the board, that particular deal wouldn't be counted towards the number that we had at the time, which was $1 billion. Because as you know, we bring any deals that exceed $4 million to the board. Mm-hmm. And last year, we had, again, this kind of situation where towards the end of the year, there was a conversation with CILAC about perhaps receiving a large carry forward, and we were kind of dancing around. So how do we have the $1 billion limit while we have all these projects that come to the board? So what we did was that we said, okay, if we come to the board, then it doesn't count towards a $1 billion limit. That we didn't actually test that, but the limit of that is that oftentimes when we give these resolutions to the staffers at CILAC, they're looking at that dollar amount. And then you then have to do all this tallying, well, we brought this deal to the board, and here's a resolution for that deal. So we felt that it just probably is easier if the board is willing to entertain this, that these are not to exceed dollar amounts. And I think there's general agreement that if we take a lot of volume cap, it gets put to good use, and it's helpful all around.
I think that's great.
And this includes conduits as well, right? So it's conduits, deals that we don't bring to the board and deals that we do bring to the board, so that you have an idea of exactly how much volume cap we're asking for.
I think there's been a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been seconded. Roll call, please.
Ms. Davila Farias? Yes. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher? Yes. Ms. Gunn?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Metcalf? Yes. Mr. Prince?
Yes.
Ms. Von Hochleber?
Yes.
Ms. Sotelo?
Yes.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Gunning?
Aye.
Resolution 18-12 is approved.
Good job, Mr. Flood. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 11.
Good afternoon. Good morning.
Good morning. It's not afternoon yet. It's getting there.
With the loss of our beloved ledge director, Melissa and I are like fumbling, trying to figure out what the process is when we want to talk to Congress. And so without kind of being a clarity of what that process is, we thought it'd be best just to bring it to the board and get your blessings. But we are working with our agency and our sister department at HCD. But we wanted to also express how serious it is that we move to support the FFB, Federal Financing Bank HUD Risk Share Partnership on behalf of HFAs across the United States. There are about 14 active housing finance agencies that are using the Federal Financing Bank HUD Risk Share product. There are more housing finance agencies lined up to utilize this project. HUD has told us that there is no need for this product going forward. I would advocate that that is not necessarily true. And until and at such time as the municipal bond market is able to give us a rate that we can put out in the market to allow for the more financing of affordable housing, or until we are able to securitize a HUD risk share loan through Ginnie Mae, I think we do need to continue to use this product. And so the information you have before you is asking for support of a request that we want to make to Senator Dianne Feinstein to continue to advocate for the continuation of the FFB HUD risk share product, at least for another year. The way the program is set up, there is a participating financing agreement between HUD and the Federal Financing Bank, and that particular agreement says that you have to have all your construction done by 2020. September 2020. We'd like them to give a softer landing if they are going to actually wind down this program to allow it to go out to 2021. And instead of an additional $500 million, $1 billion. And this is a nationwide. This is to assist housing finance agencies nationwide. So you do have a resolution in your packet. You also have a form that we've worked with Business Consumer Services Housing Agency that we would submit through the Business Consumer Services Housing to the senator. We have a win-win kind of flyer on why we think the program should continue. Mm-hmm. And we have a Q&A that was prepared by the National Council of State Housing Agencies on moving that product forward. And so I just ask for the board's support that we can continue to work through this congressional process and continue to try to advocate for the program.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? I know T explained this to us during the evaluation committee, so I certainly support going forward with this. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 18.13?
I motion.
Second?
Second.
Teresa, some motion and second. Melissa?
Ms. Avila Farias? Yes. Mr. Schaefer?
Yes.
Ms. Gallagher? Yes. Ms. Gunn?
Yes.
Mr. Hunter?
Yes.
Mr. Metcalf?
Yes.
Mr. Prince?
Yes.
Ms. Von Hochleber?
Yes.
Ms. Sotelo?
A resounding yes.
Mr. Russell? Aye. And Mr. Gunning?
Aye.
Resolution 18-13 is approved.
Just as a follow-up on that, a secondary ask that we're including in that letter to Congress didn't require a monetary value, so we didn't bring that before the board. But one of the things that the board had asked and we are looking into is as the Section 8 housing assistance payment contracts come up for renewal, CalHFA has not been retaining the administration of those contracts. And so a second part of that ask is going to be to allow us to retain that administrative work on the asset management side. And that gets to some of the questions the board had asked about monitoring fees and to be able to pay for those monitoring fees. Initially, before 2012, we had about 135 Section 8 HAP contracts that went with loans in our portfolio. That has been reduced to about 88, and half of those we're continuing to do the work, but we're not receiving the admin fee. And so going forward, we're making a request that if we have it in our portfolio and that contract comes up for renewal, that we want to keep that within the agency since we're already doing that work. So that'll be a secondary request that we ask, that we get to retain the administration of those of which we have in our portfolio. And that's it.
Great, thank you, Tia, thank you, Michael. Moving on to item 12 is our customary reports. I would like to just draw your attention to the very first one on the agency swaps. I want to commend Tim. This has been a headache, and to watch these numbers go down is just tremendous. So Tim, thank you. So if you take a look at that, and the switch to fixed rate debt is better than that variable debt we've been suffering under. So thank you, Tim. Is there any questions about any of the other reports, Jonathan?
I just also wanted to highlight, I think, it's part of the pattern, when you look at the REO properties,
Yes.
that we only have 12.
Yes.
And here a couple of years ago, we had 1,300. So I think that's good work on the part of the agency and staff, but also obvious improvement in the economic climate in California and the country. And it's certainly a relief to see that number go down that low.
I agree. Mr. Russell?
With regards to the legislative report, could we get a real brief update on the replacement of our legislative, our staff that we've lost? Ms. Richardson?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought we have posted there's two particular positions that we're recruiting for now, General Counsel and Director of Legislation. And Melissa and I would like to fill that as quickly as possible, but they have been posted, so both of those positions are posted, and we hope to have them both filled before the end of the fiscal year.
Would you share those job descriptions with the board so we can flood you with our suggestions?
Absolutely.
Our recommendations. Any other questions, Mr. Prince?
Yeah, page 93 on the report regarding the tours. I just want to be clear, this isn't an issue about HUD canceling a contract. These are project-based vouchers coming through the housing authority, right? There are housing authorities that are at 80% utilization and 100% allocation of funds, right? So what's happening is there's a lot of pressure on these properties. And so it's not an issue about what if HUD cancels the contract, it's an issue about what happened, because the contract between the housing authority and the property says subject to federal appropriations. And in light of a 15% cut at the federal level proposed by the president, I just want to make sure that this is like this thing. If we're not aware of any contract cut by HUD, that is true. What I'm talking about is what happens when the housing authority has reduced funds. And how are they going to act, and how do we protect the families in that situation? I think that's what we're talking about. So I just wanted to kind of be clear about
and
that.
Thank you so much for making that clear, because I have expressed to staff that there is a difference. And so for hearing that from the board, that it's the project-based vouchers that are being entered into contracts from the local government.
Right, it's the project basing of the tenant-based vouchers to a property that the housing authority is doing. I also have not heard of, I assume that a housing authority is going to protect its project-based voucher contracts in the event that they have reduced funding. That's what I assume would happen, but I don't think that that's a fair assumption to say across the board. So that's why I think we're just saying what happens Again, a 15% cut is proposed by the budget, or by the president for the federal budget, for the HUD budget, so that's what I think we're talking about.
And we do intend to bring this policy conversation as part of the policy retreat, because we've been going back and forth and back and forth, and part of it, the issue is an issue of terminology. There is no board policy on tours. There isn't. What we have is standard practices and procedures of how we do underwriting, and I think Michael tries to explain that in the memo. And I think part of the confusion is when the staff comes up and they say, we want to waive policy, that the board gets in their mind that they're waiving some board-created policy, and we really need to get on the same wavelength on the terminology we use. And then we have some staff that are using operating reserves to mean transit operating reserves. And so there's a differentiation and lingo and understanding of what programs. And so being able to have a policy conversation around that at the board, at the policy retreat, I think it would be very beneficial to both the staff and the board members, because I have been hearing both sides, and I understand that there is a difference. So thank you, Board Member Preston, for making that clear.
And, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, as we have that discussion, it's critical to really understand what the industry is doing. So what tax credit investors are requiring and what other lenders are requiring. Again, I don't want to be so prescriptive in our underwriting guidelines, but at the end of the day, we need to be responsive to what the industry is doing. So, and it does differ between, a senior project, a special needs project, a veteran special needs project, transition age youth. It all varies by industry, by type. So we have to look at that.
And if I heard you right, sorry. So one clarification, it does talk about the contracts that CalHFA has with properties. So those are multifamily side of HUD, which is different from the PIH side of HUD. So that's why I'm trying to be very clear. Ben scratching his head, he's like, I don't want to go back to HUD, right? So, but if you're going to have this as, if I heard you right, if you're going to have this as part of the conversation at the retreat, maybe you ask someone like Chris Guig or Michelle to come in. I mean, I think Sacramento's done 20% of their allocation of vouchers to be project-based vouchers, so maybe they can kind of talk about how they're underwriting and looking at it as well. So it's Fresno, we have very small number, so I'm talking about my guessing of what other PHAs might do, not from my own perspective.
When you have comments?
And I like to see Michelle.
Okay.
Yes, just a quick question on page 94. So you can see that there was a estimated 300 million in the conduit issuance program, and now we're projecting will be below 250 million. I'm curious if that has any impact on planning, staffing considerations, revenue considerations, et cetera.
We are going to modify that, I think, in the mid-year and come and talk about those, that we are not going to meet those targets in multifamily. So staffing, I don't see an issue with that, but revenue targets, it is going to come in lower on revenue targets.
But we've kind of moved into discussion of other board matters. Is there anything else on board wants to discuss? I do want to, we've already talked about the planning retreat, which is scheduled for April 12th, I think, prior to the board meeting in the afternoon. So if you would make sure, reach out to all the board members and let them know and make sure they're there, because I think it's valuable and instructional for us to take this time to sort of more freewheeling than the formal structure of the board meetings to really ask these questions and talk about how the agency's doing. So let's make sure we get full attendance there, Melissa.
And if there are items of particular concern, because I have my notes that I've been taking that I know are items of particular concern, but if the board members have items of particular concern from a policy perspective that they would like to see on that agenda, then I highly recommend that you get back to us so that we can have that on the agenda, so that we can make sure that we have the background and the appropriate speakers to come and speak to those issues.
Any other discussion from the board? Seeing none, is there any testimony from the public? no testimony from the public, then that magic moment, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved, is seconded? Seconded it. We're now adjourned, thank you.